arguments against the Constitution. He says, what would you like, magnificent government or liberty government? Magnificent, he meant magnificent like France, magnificent like Spain, magnificent like England. But no, the secret to freedom is to keep government as localized as possible. And so it should be also noted that the Confederacy, North Carolina was about to secede from the Confederacy over conscription. It didn't mean, though, that they weren't going to be fighting the war. You'd just be an ally, an independent nation that would ally itself, but they weren't going to allow their people to be conscripted. And the greatest riot in American history was in New York City over the draft in 1863. And it had racial overtones. It was Irish hating the blacks. It had, but it collapsed. The order collapsed when it was no longer possible to stop recruiting or to stop conscription. Conscription was so evil that you could, and he's correct, you could buy your way out of there. Rich man's war, poor man's fight. Both sides did this. You could hire someone after you got drafted, take your place, and then you could buy, just pay up. It was about 1 year's salary, something like it was $300, $400, pay up with 1 year's salary. The Confederacy, unquestionably, was an oligarchy. No question about that. The next question is, what was this war about? Just think, who would be ashamed of our American war for independence? Who would be ashamed of it? And yet, we talk gloriously about how we kicked out the British and brought liberty. The South could hardly be said to be fighting for freedom while it held a large proportion of slaves. This argument is easily dismissed. One could argue in precisely the same way that the American colonial revolution couldn't have been fighting for freedom either, because they had lots of slaves and it was legal in the North. There were plenty of slaves in the North, mostly household slaves. But what happened is that they were allowed to take care of slavery later. And the South was going to, and we know this. Yes, I know, it was a last desperate measure, but Robert E. Lee petitioned that slaves be armed and sent into the army, and they would be given their freedom. There's no question there was resistance to that, but it was overcome. Edmund Griffin committed suicide. However, another Southern congressman said, we will not deny anything that General Lee asks. And he said, if I have to choose between independence and slavery, then slavery has got to go. And it carried the day. Now, did blacks get into the Confederate Army? Too little, too late. Although we know there were black combat veterans. And the Sons of the Confederacy is a very unique fellow. He's black. He said, my father fought in the war. And he wasn't peeling potatoes. And he wasn't, he was fighting. He was a free black, and he joined the Confederacy. It is you see, an army is like a tornado. You don't know what it's going to do, what direction it's going to take. They don't ask questions if you're secession or union. Well, maybe they did here and there, but forget it. Don't count on it. When you look at the sense of the great destruction in the South, anybody wants to try and keep it away from themselves. It is the most fundamental urge to defend your homeland. Rome armed its slaves during the Punic Wars. They weren't afraid to do it, and the South was ready to do it. Slavery was going to die a natural death. There's no question about that. Nobody can see the future. They can't do that. But the mechanization of agriculture was going to make slavery obsolete in a hurry. Did we have to destroy all these hundreds of thousands of lives? At what point is the price too high? That's what I want to know. We can say, yes, there are fruits of keeping the Union together. No one can doubt that. Yes, there are fruits. What did we give up? We gave up states' rights. We got a tyrannical federal government. The good doctor doesn't see that we are standing on Lincoln's shoulders when it comes to a federal government that's out of control. want to talk about the Articles of Confederation. The term perpetuity is a legal term. Perpetuity. My father chartered a recreational area in Illinois when I was a kid, and it was the contract he drew up meant perpetuity, which means it'll go on for as long as you want it to. That is a legal maxim. I'm not a lawyer, but I know about perpetuity. To say that then once you were in the Articles of Confederation, you couldn't leave. I said they retained all of their sovereignty. Sovereignty means no higher authority. They retained all their freedom and they retained all their independence. Calhoun is a brilliant man. He did not invent the state compact theory. The federal government was created by the states. Henry Jaffa is his mentor. And Jaffa said that the states bear the same resemblance to the federal government as counties are to states. This is insane, because the counties don't create the states. I grew up in McHenry County. McHenry County did not get together with Polk County and didn't get together with Jasper County and create the state of Illinois. And so the federal government is an agent of the states, and when you can't agree, what is the right cause for secession? I know the South didn't like the election outcome of 1860. Whether or not their reasons were good, the good doctor says, well, it wasn't a good enough reason. Well, you tell me, who decides that? The Hague Court? A state is its own agent and will make its own decision as to whether or not the Union is of benefit to them anymore. In the tariff question, Calhoun rightly cited the fact that the tariffs, 75% of the federal revenue came out of the South. All of the benefit went to the North. It was, in fact, corporate welfare, 19th century style. The South paid 75% of the revenues. Tariffs are perfectly constitutional, but again, Patrick Henry warned, when you have instead when you've surrendered the sovereignty of each individual state into a consolidated government, then the will of the majority becomes the tyranny of the majority. I am sure the good doctor would not want his life savings up for a vote, because I think he'd probably lose that if we all had a chance to get his life savings.
I'm sure that Abraham Lincoln would agree that we shouldn't take your life savings either. Not just because you're his relative. Okay, well, John C. Calhoun was a genius. He was quite a, I would say, an evil genius. Madison was the only founder to live long enough to hear his exposition and protest in 1828, and he denounced it. He called Calhoun's doctrines heresy. He said the states had never retained all of their sovereignty. In Federalist 39, in the second half, most of Federalist 39, Madison explains how the attributes of sovereignty are perfused throughout the system of government. That the state governments as well as the federal government still have the attributes of sovereignty. The Constitution was not a treaty, and the Union of States was not a league. The Federalist Papers is very explicit in saying that that was the bane of the ancient confederacies that they wanted to get away from. And when Madison first sees Calhoun's doctrines emerging out of the South in opposition to the tariff, he takes great alarm, and he says, these have been invented by a man with shining talents, and he worries about them, and to the last breath of his life, he makes political warfare on them, even though he's an old man. He writes an article in the North American Review denouncing these new doctrines. His final message, he wrote a posthumous note called Message to My Countrymen, which is to us. He says, to beware of the opponent, I'm paraphrasing, but to beware of the opponent of union that person will be like the serpent in the Garden of Eden, or Pandora with her box open. So I could say more. I've written a lot about Calhoun and studied him carefully, and here is an interesting little factoid that I find very significant. When Madison died, his notes on the Federal Convention were put up for purchase by the Library of Congress. Calhoun, even though he had authorized appropriations to buy many other books that were in the Library of Congress, said that there was no power in the Constitution available to purchase Madison's notes. And everybody in the Senate said, are you kidding me? This is Madison's notes. You're a strict constructionist. You say that we need to interpret the Constitution honestly. Don't you want to have his notes? There are no other worthy record of the Federal Convention. And he wouldn't really disclose why, but we all know why. It's because he didn't want the true expounding of the Constitution known to his contemporaries. He invented a new Constitution through very creative interpretation, masked and disguised as strict constitutionalism. I don't blame Abraham Lincoln for big government. Yes, in every war we have fought, including this most deadly of wars, the national government activated and expanded. After the Civil War, the national government shrunk back to its boundaries, except during the Reconstruction period. But even then, the occupation of the South was meager. The Union Army went from 2 million men down to 38,000. Most of those were stationed in the West in 1 year. If you look at all the cost of government, state, federal, and national, from the earliest possible records to our present time, you will see that adjusting for the wars, and this is a very good index of the size of government, government stayed small until well into this 20th century. So Lincoln's not responsible for what we're experiencing right now. In fact, if Lincoln were here right now, he would be down there with us with a bulldozer down at the Isenbeck Road. He believed in fidelity to the Constitution and defended fidelity to the Constitution and the proper balance of power between state and national governments. And so today, the threat is coming from the other quarter rather than coming up from the states. It's now coming from national government. And if Lincoln were here, I have no doubt that he would be on our side. Slavery was not going to die a natural death. I don't know where Mr. Berg gets that from. It had been growing every census, every decade, nonstop. And they all said, without any hesitation, that slavery would be in perpetuity. It's mentioned 10 times in the Confederate Constitution. The Confederate Constitution says that slavery will be a perpetual institution. The United States Constitution doesn't mention the word once.
Bob, you've got 5 minutes for the last word. Thank you, Dr. Nabors, and then we'll have questions from the audience.
I have no doubt, Doctor, we'll get our last words in through the questions as well. So, the last thing I want to say is that Madison, like all politicians, can't be consistent throughout his entire life. He got mushy-headed towards the end of his life, and I can prove that. He was the man who opposed the Bank of the United States when Hamilton tried to push it through in the 1790s, and when he was president, he signed it. It's rechartering. And he said, well, you know, I guess I kind of lost that argument. And forgetting about the principle that it was unconstitutional. So he's a human being. As I said at the start, you know, just listening to what a founding father says, you got to see at what point of the conveyor belt they were. Liberals like a constitution that is a living document, that changes with the times. And when I remember reading this in textbook after textbook, And then the late Joseph Sobran said, to say that a constitution is a living document is to admit it's not living, but dead. It means it can turn into anything you want. Words have no meanings. Liberals love that. That's why we have homosexual marriage, abortion on demand, all 9 months of pregnancy. Why the Supreme Court dares to tell the PGA that they got to allow somebody to ride a cart. It's unbelievable the micromanagement that comes after you give up states' rights. So they like morphing constitutions. The cheerleaders of Lincoln have said the Gettysburg Address is a new constitution. I don't argue with that. And it fits right into the liberal way of doing things. The next thing is socialists like to confiscate and redistribute your property. And that's what these unjust tariffs did. Lincoln did not care whether or not slavery was voted up or down when the war started, but he wanted to make sure the tariffs were collected. And the fact that he had a long career as not only an attorney on small town circuits, but he was also a corporate lawyer for the Illinois Central Railroad, showed you that he knew which side the bread was buttered, and that was with the big corporations who get the revenues of the tariffs applied to them for government help. The railroads, they got land grants after the war, I won't go into that. But the whole canal business, the South didn't need canals. They didn't need canals, they had navigable rivers far upstream. So that giant sucking sound to the north, that's how the South saw the tariffs as unjust. And Calhoun brilliantly said, all tariffs must be uniform. Now you might think that means they have to be collected uniformly at the same rate. Otherwise you're going to play favorites of one harbor over another. But it also, he said, meant that the benefits must be uniform. And the South had no benefits from the tariffs. Again, Patrick Henry said that's what's going to happen. The tax power will enslave our people. I can't begin to tell you what it means to have your leg blasted off from this war, to be starved to death, to have your home burned. And these things are considered by many Americans just and right. In fact, Lincoln said if every treasure piled up by the bondsman's lash has to be paid for by blood, he said in prophetic terms, then we can still say that God is just. The North kept slavery under its Constitution for 89 years. The Confederacy was ready to get rid of it after 4. The tyranny of Abraham Lincoln has only been scratched at. I am honored to have been given the opportunity to discuss it. I think we wound up discussing constitutional issues more than we did the blood and guts that came out. The fact that Lincoln rigged elections in Maryland by letting soldiers vote, that he put spies at the polling places, said that guy's union, he's secession, get him out. And this is the guy who says government of the people, by the people, for the people. He's rigging elections. He's packing it in with visiting soldiers from another state. It's military justice. Unbelievable. Nobody denies this. Nobody denies they put tens of thousands of people in jail without trial. You understand what it means to be without trial? You don't know when you're coming out. You don't even get to talk to a lawyer. That's a tyrant. And then rigging elections. You know, he had to keep Maryland in the Union. Well, I agree, he certainly did. But what about the people of Maryland? Don't they get to decide? We can go, we've made our points. I want to thank Dr. Nabors, Meade Trevor, Abraham Lincoln, and Mary Todd. You know, they asked Lincoln about his wife, and I don't mean this about you, Mrs. Lieberman, I mean the real Mary Lincoln. And Abe said, my pa once told me when you make a bad bargain, hug it the tighter.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Let's have a round of applause for our debaters. Saw a lot of common threads, but there's time for questions. Has anybody got a question? Go right ahead.
Thank you, Meade, and thank you to the debaters for coming down and talking about this important historical issue. This question is for Bob Bird.
what's justified? That's the first question I've got. But you cannot escape the fact that New York, Virginia, and Rhode Island said, we join on the condition that we'll leave if we don't like it. That is a fact. It is irrefutable. It's the end of the argument. Joining the Union was an option. It's only Jackson who started to make dangerous noises. The Hartford Convention, the whole New England states were suffering terribly from, we think our second war for independence was justifiable. We had our points, so did the British. Not impressment of sailors, no, we wanted to conquer Canada, isn't that nice? But the Hartford Convention, what does it mean for the people of the New England states to have no work? The kids are hungry, they don't have a great farming agriculture, it's all commerce. They were ready to secede. The Hartford Convention voted it down, no question about it. But nobody said, bad New England, bad. Because they all knew that the right to secede is up to each state to decide.
Okay. Real quick follow-up. Bob, I just want to say that your argument seems grounded in moral relativism, because you're saying that it wasn't the place of the northern states to decide or to question the right of the South to secede, but didn't they as Americans have that right? I mean, if you have people in South Carolina, as Dr. Nabors presented, who are literally executing people for exercising their First Amendment right to speak out against slavery, don't people in the North have a right to say not only is that system of government immoral, but we have a right through force to end that system of government.
You're thinking about the United States and not these United States. Search the 191 sovereign nations in the world today and find all the abuse that you can. We don't have any business to tell them what's right or wrong by force of arms. And the Union would not have been put together unless slavery was permitted. I don't like it. It was on its way to a natural death. Doctor doesn't believe it, but every other place that had slavery ended it without a horrible civil war. Here, here.
Well, I don't have a question. I would agree with Mr. Byrd. I read something between 1800 and 1900. There was like 50 countries still practicing slavery, and every one of them got rid of it without killing off 700,000 people.
Can you repeat?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, on the question of slavery's natural, inevitable abolition in the United States, the reason why it was abolished in the United States was because of Union victory, and the reason why many other places around the globe abolished it was because of the Union victory. The Union victory in the United States had international repercussions. The Southerners intended to plant slavery in perpetuity in every territory. They were expansionists. They say it's, read their Constitution. They were practicing using slavery in the grain fields of northwestern Missouri. Now just imagine for a second if they had adapted slave labor to the great bread basket of the Midwest. And they were saying that they wanted to import more as soon as they had come clear of the war. So and I think the burden is on the other side to show how slavery would have naturally died when, if you look at the growth curve from the first census in 1790 until the last one in 1860, the growth of slavery is trending upwards every decade.
Any questions, sir, in the back?
The North always seemed to take the moral high road on slavery. But if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, General Grant didn't release his slaves until after the war? Is that correct?
Grant didn't own slaves.
Yes, he did.
He did? Where? He was from Illinois.
Yeah, I know, he did. I read
Yeah,
that too.
well, so did Stephen Douglas. I mean, and that's
To tell you the truth, I can't confirm.
You're correct. I am correct? That's it, okay.
Fortunately, I can't argue
Yes,
this
sir.
one. I could Google it.
To tell you that, I have heard that too, and it's scholarship I haven't confirmed yet, but I have heard that, so,
Okay.
okay, and the good doctor has not.
Yeah, I have not heard.
No.
Yeah.
Or
If I might, two questions, one to both speakers. The first question really is, what is a Republican form of government? Because the Constitution guarantees a Republican form of government to every state. So I'd like to have both of your opinions about what constitutes a Republican form of government. The follow-up question is, actually I have three questions, is do we presently have a Republican form of government in some of the states or at the federal level? And the third is, since I come from Texas, which joined the Union by treaty, but and left the Union alleging their Republican treaty right that we joined by treaty, we can leave by treaty, and yet by force of arms, Texas is still part of the Union. So kind of three questions there, and I answer it in 2 minutes.
I'll take the third one first, because it's the toughest one that I don't have an answer for. I don't know why they accepted Texas on those terms, because it was generally understood that the Union was perpetual amongst the other members, the founders say so, but they took Texas with that condition, and there it stands on the books. So I don't know.
So Texas is just kind of territory.
I guess they are. Repeat the first one.
The first one was, what is?
Oh, what is a Republican form of government? That's easy. Adams wrote volumes about that. He wrote in his Thoughts on Government, which he wrote in 1776 to instruct Southerners, as he referred to them, the barons of the South, who knew nothing of Republican government. He wrote Thoughts on Government to teach them about what Republican government was, and then he wrote the Constitutions of the United States, which was a multi-volume treatment of it. Madison says it defines it in Federalist 39. He says so in the Congress. It's basically majority rule justified by and limited by natural right. The lex maioris partis, the law of the greater part, which is the first law of the first natural law of every assembly. Madison says that over and over again. So does Jefferson. They quote Pufendorf.
A republic is you elect your lawmakers to make your laws for you. In a democracy, you would turn everything over to the referendum process, or which we do on the local level. It works. It can't work on a state or a national level. But again, I can't. This is what differs. Dr. Nabors and I. The Union was not perpetual. I have challenged him to say how many states would have joined the Union if it said you will suffer invasion and war if you leave. And you cannot answer New York and Virginia and Rhode Island, who said, you can read the document. We will withdraw if ever our liberties come under a threat. They decide that, not the federal government. They joined voluntarily. I don't think the doctor would think that they were going to be forced, but if we talked about perpetuity for the Articles of Confederation, but 9 states seceded from the Articles before Virginia, New York, North Carolina, and Rhode Island approved. You're a sovereign nation, you're a sovereign nation. No higher authority.
The second question was, do we have one now?
Well, we have a sham republic. We have an oligarchy. Right now, I don't think the doctor and I would dispute that, but I don't know. But
I wouldn't call it that. I would say what's happening today is that legislative powers are fusing with executive powers, greater, more and more and more. It's been happening very slowly over the last 100 years, but now it's really, I think we passed another watershed over the last year, actually. And simultaneously, the division of powers between state and federal government has been concentrating into the central government. So what this means, and I mean, I don't like saying this, and I don't like to be viewed as a crazy person and say this in public, but I think we are tending towards constitutional monarchy. And rule in the states is becoming more and more imperial in character. We have no place, we have no recourse, no venue of appeal if we don't like what the Interior Secretary rules down at Isenbeck National Wilderness Area. All we can do is beg them. And that is not That is not what citizens of a republic that shouldn't be our recourse. We should be able to determine this by popular vote. Now, yeah, I'm sorry.
Second over here, Ms. Warner.
Yes, for Mr. Byrd specifically, I just have a question for my understanding about your idea of where the boundaries of sovereignty lies. You say it's with the states, and I appreciate your argument, and there's pieces that make sense. So are you saying that, in the example of West Virginia, ideally, that growth from Virginia, was that illegal, or do you
Oh, it's
say?
absolutely illegal.
Okay.
Because it tells you in the Constitution the mechanism necessary for splitting a state. Tennessee had done it, Maine split off from Massachusetts, there's been discussion of northern Wisconsin recombining with northern Michigan. They don't have much in common with the southern part of their states. They get all the attention and revenues and so forth. And as an admission that the splitting off of West Virginia was unconstitutional, they were paying indemnity to the state of Virginia until 1933. So now you could say, well, two negatives make a positive. If you secede from a seceded state, well, then you join union. That's true. That's true. But then here's the other conundrum. And Dr. Nabors, I don't want to discuss Reconstruction, but the radical Republican Congress admitted the South seceded through Charles Sumner's state suicide theory. You don't get back into the Union unless we give you the conditions. When you seceded, you committed suicide, which means death, you left the Union. And the second thing is Thaddeus Stevens, who I've never seen a picture of that man other than it looked like he's just swallowed a sour mouse. I mean, oh, I would not want to be friends with him. Thaddeus Stevens said, I'll go you one better. We're going to treat the South as a conquered province. Grind them. Like we did in Mexico. You know, it's a conquered province. So they admitted that they seceded. Lincoln, and it's true, there's a good Lincoln. At the end of the war, he was going to totally control what the conditions were for the South to get back into the Union. He wanted it done. Boy, am I glad that troublesome body, Congress, ain't in session. You bet. Because he started the war. There's a dictator for you. Didn't vote on it. He suspended the writ of habeas corpus. The good doctor admitted that. It's in Article 1. Article 1 says these are congressional powers. And Chief Justice Roger Taney told him that, and then he was going to arrest Chief Justice Taney. Now, he may not agree with me, but I got banks of scholarship that sustains that. And there's the disagreement there.
Does not say that the Congress.
Forrest, did you want to answer that?
Yeah, Article 1, Section 9, where it mentions that in the second clause, it doesn't say anything about Congress. Taney decided that. Taney decided, but it does not, it just says that the writ of habeas corpus may be suspended only in times. It doesn't say that the Congress only can suspend it.
Article 1 is all about
Well,
the
that's an
legislative
assumption.
branch.
It's not explicit there.
Okay,
But Congress
we got
is not in
time.
session.
We got time for two more questions. Call on you.
And Dr. Nabors, is it not true that Lincoln, as a state senator, led the fight to make it illegal for any free blacks to settle in the Illinois Territory? Is it also not true that as a United States senator, he led the fight to make it illegal for any free blacks to settle in any U.S. territories? And is it not true that he led the fight as president to send all blacks out of our country, to Liberia, to Haiti, to
Nicaragua.
Nicaragua, and I believe Guyana?
Yes on number 1 and 3, no on 2. No, I beg your pardon. Not yes on 1. Yes on 3, and no on 1 and 2. He was never a senator, and
Pardon me?
Not a U.S.
Lincoln was never a senator,
Not even a state.
and he wasn't a state senator either. But you may be thinking of the Lincoln Douglas debates when he does say that he says, "I am not now, nor have been, in favor of the social and political equality of blacks and whites." He does not say, "I will never be." The fight at that time was to contain slavery, and he was being the prudent statesman he was, he knew you got to pick your battles one at a time. At that time, they needed to restrict the growth of slavery. But when he becomes president, he does stand for black citizenship. He does send a message to Nathaniel Banks, who is in charge of the occupying force in Louisiana, or not to Nathaniel Banks, the Constitutional Convention in Louisiana, asked them to consider black citizenship.
Room for all the questions, sir.
Just a short question. My understanding, I'm not a history buff, my understanding is the greenback starts.
Louder.
My understanding is the greenback starts during the Civil War, that, you know, paper money was issued during that time.
Yeah.
And is this, you know, a legacy of Lincoln? It was done by his administration, and is it positive or negative? I just like each perspective.
Well, when it comes to political economy, Bob and I are probably very close to each other. I'm for hard money, but during the war, they had to finance this massive juggernaut. And so Chase, when he was Secretary of the Treasury, invented a whole bunch of new ways to try to finance the war effort. And so, yeah, they did that. But after the war, you know, some of the fiercest abolitionists in the Republican Party were hard money, free trade congressmen. Charles Sumner.
Okay, then the other side.
Yeah.
One thing I didn't bring out tonight was the oath of office. What it doesn't say, I, Abraham Lincoln, do solemnly swear to faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Union. Doesn't say that. Preserve, protect, and defend the government. Doesn't say that. Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. And so paper money is just one other thing. Since the Union is more important than the Constitution, we can do anything we want, from military power to political power, and throw the thing away. And that's how the start of paper money, the doctor's correct. We returned to smaller government because the momentum and tradition of small government was not completely lost. But if you want to know who shattered it, I'll give you an opinion.
I think we've heard it. I'm going to leave the last word for Michael Chambers, but let's again have a round of applause for our debaters.
I have a question I'd like to pose to Dr. Nabors, and that is that if Lincoln stood for all men being created equal, and he fought for that, why was he in fact performing mass genocide on the Native Indians exactly during that period of time?
I know that because I went to college in Mankato.
Yeah, I don't know. That I know that the incident, I think it was in the Minnesota Territory. It was the largest mass hanging in United States history. It was during the war. I forget how many Native Americans were hanged at that time. 38, Bob says.
And he commuted hundreds.
He commuted. Why don't you know it better?
I went to college in Mankato where this hanging took place. That's where I got my master's degree. It is the greatest mass execution in American history. We have a world-class anthropology prof down in Kennet Peninsula College, and he said, bring that up when I told him I was debating. But to be fair to Abe Lincoln, those poor Sioux Indians, and watch out for empire if you're a native. Amen. Watch out. The idea that we're going to have a big, magnificent government does not go well for natives. And the Cherokees, as you probably know, fought with the Confederacy at the Battle of Pea Ridge. And they wrote a document telling why they were joining the Confederacy, because they'd suffered under the heavy hand of an imperial United States. But Lincoln went through the unjust railroaded proceedings of many of these Sioux Indians, and it's the worst Indian uprising in American history. I taught for 3 years right in the middle of this country in Minnesota, where it took place. And he saved hundreds of those Indians, and the ones guilty of, he separated those who were in combat versus those who were massacring and those who were guilty of rape, as best as he could. And I don't think he could probably, not being God, he couldn't tell whether or not who was really guilty. So I know we've got to wrap things up, Mike.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to thank absolutely every one of you for coming out to this debate, and I wanted to absolutely thank all three of these gentlemen for the job that they've done. If you want to linger, I have an opinion poll. I'm not asking who won the debate. I wanted a narrative here, but I'll have it out there on the table tonight. So if you want to linger, and I'll have pins out there, and you can write something that you felt that you took away from, a narrative that you took away from this event, I'd really appreciate it. I'll post it on our website. Our website is www.uflalaska.com, and I'll post your things there. So thank you very much for coming out.